Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of New Breakpoint. My name's Simon Waite, joining you here from sunny Sydney today. We're a few minutes behind schedule, but we're lucky because we've got one of our great cloud solution architects joining us today to do a cool topic. And he's just come straight hot off the heels out of a customer meeting. So we appreciate him giving us his time today to do this session. As always, if you'd like to join in, ask questions during the episode, please go to our YouTube channel and you can use the YouTube chat function to post questions and they'll come into the studio. Or alternatively, you can post questions via our Twitter channel at Microsoft AU Dev and they'll also come in to us here in the studio. If you're watching the show after we've live streamed, by all means, make sure you tweet your questions to us there as well. And if you are collaborating and contributing, make sure you do it after you've had a look at our Code of Conduct, which covers how you can best work with others in our community. If you do enjoy the show today and you'd like to get more information on the sorts of things that we do that are focused on the Australian developer community, head on over and sign up to our monthly newsletter. Myself and my team curate the content in that, so we try to keep it really interesting and helping you develop your skills both in the Microsoft space and generally when it comes to doing development. So our guest for today, we've got Todd Whitehead, who is one of our cloud solution architects here at Microsoft Australia, who's going to cover a day in the life of an API. So if you've been working in the industry over the last few years, HTTP REST-based GraphQL style APIs are increasingly an important part of any solution that you put together, particularly in a microservices world. And today, Todd's going to take us on a journey to show how the tools that Microsoft builds and the services that we offer with the Azure platform can really help you speed up the development and testing of your APIs, and then also the operational aspects of managing those APIs. So without further ado, let me get Todd onto the stream. Hey, Todd, good morning. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, mate.
How's the weather where you are today?
It's feeling a little Melbourne-y. Right now it's fine. An hour ago it was storming in the end of the world. So yeah, not too bad.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm pleased we're on the live stream now and not an hour ago, because who knows how the internet would have gone with all of those storms happening. I did notice that you've got what looks like an Altair sitting on the shelf there behind you. That's one of those cool Commodore 64 Devops style things that you love to do, is it?
It is. Yes, I've managed to hook up a Commodore 64 to Azure DevOps. The Altair I haven't yet, but it's a work in progress. Always like to keep it up there as a reminder. That was the very first product Microsoft ever made, was basic for that thing. So it's an interesting little thing to have a play with and see how the world used to be.
We've been doing it for a while. So look, I think everyone's here today because they want to hear this API in a day story. So I'm going to hop off the stream and I'll bring your screen up to share, and then over to you. Appreciate your time for today. So let me just add your screen here, and over to you, Todd. I'll be back a little bit later to wrap up the show, details of our next show and Microsoft build. So good luck, Todd. See you soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, so obviously the title of this little session is Day in the Life of an API. So it isn't so much about going into super detail about how to build APIs. We know how to build APIs. We've been building them for a long time using a lot of different technologies, good and bad. Yes, Soap, I'm looking at you. But I guess it's really the intent of this is to have a look at what is, as of 2021. How can we build APIs? What does a typical day look like for someone building it? What are some of the tools we can do to make that less painful and certainly way more productive and involve a lot of people? It's interesting when people talk about Azure, because if you say Azure or any of the other cloud providers, you think big data centers or data centers underwater, and that's all true, and that's super awesome and blinky lights. But as a developer, someone who uses those cloud services, everything's really an API. Every single thing you do in Azure is an API, whether you're using the portal, using the CLI, using an SDK, it ends up going through an API. So they're just absolutely fundamental to everything we do. And the other thing that's changed, I guess, is who's using these APIs. So obviously there's, think of developers like us, call them pro developers, but, people who think and like to write code. But then there's also now a whole lot more people that are interested in consuming those, right? So that might be, broadly think of those as citizen developers. So whether they're building stuff in Power Apps or Power BI or any other things, lots and lots of people without coding also want to consume APIs and do that. And the APIs themselves, compared to, way back in the day, Commodore 64 days or whatever, much more heterogeneous. Like you can run APIs anywhere, and it's growing more and more common for the APIs we're actually building and using to actually be hosted in multiple places. So even if you're developing on Azure, that you can host your API on, Kubernetes or App Service or Azure Functions, which we're going to look at today. Or it might actually be an API that's not directly from writing any code. It could be a logic app, a serverless workflow that you can actually expose as a HTTP API, right? So you don't even need to do it. And increasingly with a lot of the customers I'm working with, they're actually using services like Azure Search, Cognitive Service, or even just directly to things like Service Bus, right? Things that, back in the day you would have potentially had to write code to deal with. You can just treat them as an API and do some transformation and call that directly. And of course, those APIs may not even be in Azure. They could be on-prem, they could be another cloud, they could be a third-party hosted wherever. So what we're going to do in the next kind of 10 minutes is just take a really quick lightning kind of travel through what that could look like from the time someone says, hey, I need an API, through to how do we actually build it. So let's get cracking. So what we're going to do here is actually say, well, look, I'm not going to go and start an API by writing code. I'm actually going to sit down with the person or the team who actually needs the API. Right? We're going to do a kind of a design first approach. In Azure API management makes that super, super easy. So we can obviously import things, but we just want to say, let's just start with a blank API, right? So I'm speaking with Shirley from marketing, and she's told me about this great new service she needs. She needs something that's going to make her life much easier to submit and retrieve her TPS reports, because that's just bugging the heck out of her, right? So, okay, all we need to do is provide some really basic details about what this API is, what it's called, and we get this really great design experience. Now, we're going to kind of build this the first time through the portal, but understanding that behind the scenes, it's building an open API specification in a document, right? So it is code sitting behind this, even though we might be doing this in the first instance through the portal, just because this makes it a really interactive kind of design thing. So we can quickly ask Shirley what she needs. All right, she needs a way to get it. Okay, great. We need a get function. We can give it some description, some really basic information. We can start to flesh that out. We can see that, we need a parameter, obviously, for this. We need some ID, so we'll give that a little bit of a description, nothing too onerous. We can go in now and say, okay, what's actually going to come back? So I can come in here and just add some sample JSON. I'm just making this up. It's going to have these fields. Here's some nonsense responses. And based on that, Azure API Management is going to generate a payload description or struct schema for it, so we can see that. All right, well, we're doing that. We're sitting with it. Now, we can actually come along now and actually add some sample responses. So we've seen the one we've created. That's really great. But what we can then do is say, hey, look, even before we go and write any line of code or API, we actually want to test this ourselves. And we actually we're, believe it or not, now in a position where we can get this API into the hands of either pro developers or citizen developers, right, to start using it, even though we haven't written the back end yet. Okay, so what we're going to do, one of the real power features of API management is this idea of policies. And this is just a sample set here, right? But these can be anything from, filtering IPs, rate limiting, validating web tokens, all sorts of things. In our particular case, we're just going to add a mock response. So when this API gets called, I want you to send, and we're going to choose to send back that sample I provided before, and that's it. So we can see now here things are going to come into this API, go through and come out the other end. So we're actually at a point now, mocking's enabled, we've got an API, apologies. We can actually come in to test it. You can see up the top there's a little test menu. We come in, we get this nice little screen. Okay, it prompts us for the ID because that's the thing we set it need. It shows us a description. We can type that in and actually send it, and we can see it's going to build that request for us, and we're going to get back a response. So even though we haven't built any code for an API, we've got this coming in through API management, hitting those policies. It's generating that mock response we saw there, and sending that back. So we can now start to share that. And what we can also start to do as we do this, we can create what we call revisions. So these are not changes to the API spec, but these are just some little information to say, hey, we changed something on the back end. Maybe it's a policy, maybe we applied a rate limit. So we can start to record as we do go through this process, what those changes that have been made to the API. And the nice thing with that is, whilst that's all we've done, API management has now generated a developer portal for us. So this portal is something that pro developers are going to use to go in, discover, and build out from those APIs. So we can, as a developer, I log in now. I can see the APIs I've got access to. I go into the one we created, TPS Central. I can see the information. You can see it's populated that based on the little bit of details we put there. It shows you how to do a request. That's kind of nice. That's good doco. But there's this awesome little button called Try It. And I don't know about you, but if I see a button called Try It, I have to try it. So at its simplest level, the developer can use this just to send test requests, just like we could in the other portal. But equally well, you'll see up here, there's a whole bunch of languages listed. So I can click on any one of those, and it's going to go away and generate the sample code I need to call that API. So it doesn't matter whether it's C#, Python, all those kind of good things. Objective-C, if you just like writing NS a lot, it can generate fully contained programs that will produce those for you. Awesome. So we've got an API. We haven't written any code yet. We're going to do that. So we could obviously go and now write an API using an Azure function or something else. But just keep track of my time. We can do some other smarter things. So we can export the definition of this API using the Open API format in YAML or JSON, depending on your preference for curly braces. Then what we get is the spec for that API, right? And this can be used by anyone as a way to know what is the contract for this API. But within VS Code, because I'm hoping everyone's using VS Code because it's so darn awesome, we can then do a couple of things. We could go through and have it generate the code for us. So under Azure Functions, if I'm going to do that, I can click give me a new Functions project. Again, pick the language I like, whatever makes you happy. Go through, and because I picked C#, it'll ask me, what do I want, .NET 5 or Core? I'm going to go 5 just because I'm rolling. And then this is where you typically get this, this idea of a trigger. Azure Functions have a trigger. What called it? It could be HTTP. It could be something landing in a blob store. It could be whatever. But you'll see now down the bottom there isn't the option for a HTTP trigger from an Open API spec. So we're going to choose that. Once it pops up, there we go. We just point to that file we downloaded, that Open API, and we're done. It's generated the skeleton for us, C#, .NET 5, that implements all of those APIs that were defined in our spec. We just have to go in and flesh out the details of what we want it to do. We get a nice model and all those kind of good things as a developer we would want to do. So that's a really quick way to be productive and not have to worry about all the boilerplate text. We could also go in through the Azure API management add-on within Visual Studio Code, drill down to the operation we want, and there's an option there called Scaffold Azure Functions, which effectively does the same thing. We can also, so that will generate code just like from the Open API spec. We can also go in here and do everything we could do in the portal for that API. We can do right in VS Code. We do not need to leave it. So, for example, if we wanted to test that API, we can just go test. It'll generate a REST request for it. One thing to note you'll see there is for this API, I've specified that you actually have to have a subscription key to call it. So it'll put that in. I'm actually doing that using an environment variable in VS Code because I'm sure you're all lovely people, but I don't trust you that much. So that'll just reference that when we build it. We click send request, and there we go. It comes back, and we get that same testing response directly here in VS Code. Super awesome. Now, again, the policies that we created in the portal, we can do right here in code, right? So previously we added that mock response one, but we could add another one as well. So, for example, I might want to add a rate limiting policy that says, hey, you know what? You can only call this a certain number of times in a certain period. So maybe 3 times in 30 seconds for this particular API, or for this particular user of this API, or this particular IP address, whatever I want to do. So there you go. I can add that. So 3 times in 60 seconds, and I can go away and test it. And eventually, once I test it too often, I'll start to see there it's started to rate limited. And it'll actually even tell you, it knows how long is left in the window. So it'll tell you when to try again when your thing will expose. So super awesome. We've gone from an API from design. We've been able to export it, been able to create the code in whatever language you like. So basically everything, even though we've looked at some GUIs and tools, everything under the hood is still code. It's all JSON, it's all YAML, it's all that kind of good stuff. So there's a great little kit called the Azure API Management Devops Resource Kit, which you can use either in a brownfield scenario, so you can actually point it at an instance you've already got, and it'll generate nicely formatted templates to represent that whole definition of all your APIs, all your policies, all the subscribers, all those kind of things. Or you can use it from scratch to build something out. So once we have something like that, we've got our code for the APIs, then we can just do our normal kind of CI/CD pipeline, because portals and ClickOps are great for getting started, but realistically, we want to move this into rub a little DevOps on it. So there's, once we've got that code, it's a pretty straightforward process. Doesn't matter whether you're using Azure DevOps, GitHub, whatever tooling you want. Azure DevOps and GitHub are obviously better, it just goes without saying. But whatever makes you happy, go for it. And there's some workflows and tools and guidance around exactly how to do that through to production. Just to wrap up, because I'm mindful of time. So the people we haven't really spoken about is those citizen developers. So this is all great for people who like code and understand APIs, but what if we've got someone who just wants to build a Power App using our API? Well, just like we exported the Open API spec, we can export this directly into Power Apps. So you just click the button on the portal, takes you through here, give it some name, give it some details. Remember, this is going to be consumed by citizen developers, so potentially not as technical. So although it'll pull in all the description and all the fields, we give it a bit of an icon, give it a bit of flair, go along. We can customize, okay, for that API, there's only certain APIs or certain actions on those APIs I want the citizen developers to be able to access. I do that. I provide the API key, which again, I'm not going to do. And there you go. I've, in probably a minute and a half, I've now published that API into Power Apps, so that basically anyone who's building a Power App or a Power BI or anything like that can just pick that up as a plug and play connector, and they can start building out their apps, and away they go. So that's how am I doing for time? Oh, I was a little over. Anyway, so that's obviously just touching the surface. That's a really a quick trip through, I guess, how you could spend your day just building out some simple APIs. API management, I know you're not supposed to have favorites. It is my actual favorite developer service on Azure, just because of how rich it is, the amazing things you can do with it. So definitely go and check that out. I've got some resources there, but I've got, there is a GitHub repo, which I'm pretty sure we've got linked in the show notes. So on there, I've also posted a whole bunch of resources and some example code that I've generated out of this. But in reality, it's really that information that's going to be useful to you there to go and extract that and start playing with it. So yeah, go build APIs.
Fantastic, Todd. Thank you very much for that. I think to your point, I think it's clear in the short space of time that you had to talk to us today that you can be very productive with this very quickly. And I know that API mock endpoint is often a very common request, is like, we just need an endpoint that we can hit to get a response from, so that we can build the consuming application, components that will talk to that API, even if we don't have, the actual payload responses and the variety of responses we'll get.
Sorry, I was going to say, I've actually got a customer who was implementing some APIs that were purely reference data that only got updated every 12 months or so. Mm-hmm. They're actually using the mocking feature for their production release. They just use
Okay.
mocks, and they just have a DevOps pipeline that once a year pushes the updates from some Markdown files. That's all they need.
Yeah, perfect. And you don't even need to mess about with Redis caches and caching responses at that point. If it's really literally just every 12 months, even if it's every month, that's a sort of a batch process that's quite easy to update there. And I think the API management service as well is doing some really interesting stuff around self-hosted gateways, so that you've got some flexibility about where that gateway endpoint lives once you build the API out. And you're absolutely right. It's that rapid application development, which is probably a term that gets overused a bit in the industry, but I think we touch on each of those parts of the journey, right from IDE, desktop-based development with something like Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio, or your editor of choice. But as you've shown, the extensions in VS Code can really speed up some of that journey. Look, I appreciate, I know you came hot off of a customer meeting to join us today, and no doubt you probably have a customer that's waiting to work with you on their journey to Azure. So I want to say a very big thank you for joining us today. You're right, we do have the link to your GitHub repository in the show notes, which we'll have the link up to in just a moment. But give everyone a wave out there in viewer land. So we'll say goodbye for now, and appreciate your time today, Todd. And we'll see you when we have you on next new Breakpoint at some point in the future.
Look forward to it. Thanks, man.
All right, thanks, Todd. All right, so as promised, the show notes, that link in the bottom of the screen there. If you go to the show notes, they have been updated with a link to Todd's GitHub repository, where you can go and have a play and read about Azure API management and all the great things that you can do with it. It is a really quick and simple way to get started, either from that designer-based experience to the code-based experience. But let's talk about what's coming up next week. So I'm joined by my colleague, JT, so he works on the same team as I do, and he's going to walk us through an interesting journey on how we can build solutions using Power Platform, Azure Functions, and Azure Static Websites. And if you've been following the news, Azure Static Websites GA today, so it's generally available. And the great news is there's a free tier for that service as well. So if you are doing single-page web applications with simple RESTful APIs, you now have a great home on Azure where you can build and host those solutions on. I did want to mention that we do have a special show coming up for Build, which will be on the 25th to the 27th of May. It's a free online event that you can go and register for now. Link is there on the page. Our show will be on 3 p.m. on Thursday, the 26th of May, so not our usual time. You'll have to register for the event to see it, although we will have the show up online in our usual place on YouTube after the Build event. So without wanting to hold up your day any further, I want to thank you all for joining us for the show today, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.